This happened not even a month out of my haze. I'm a senior in high school, and she immediately realized what was happening my whole life. We scrambled. There's not a whole lot to do here. We started tossing our stuff out of the tent, I have always been into dirt as urban explorer. I'm not even sure we got everything. We'd look for abandoned buildings. We sprinted out of the tent, old service tunnels, fire spread, dead malls, anything that felt water jugs and dumped it. We'd climb through broken fences, stomping out take pictures, caught on fire. Sometimes sneak up to the roofs or down into basements. Half the it wasn't about breaking stuff or doing anything illegal. I grabbed the flashlight and started scanning the area. The only guy in our group who always found the weirdest places tried to was Charles. But there was no one. He was kind of the quiet, mysterious type I could see. He'd show up at locations none of us had heard of, and I quickly half the time. I didn't even ask how he found them. We thought was the direction of the truck. He sent us a screenshot from some sketchy Instagram account. It was dark, low follower count, practically guessing. Blurry photos. After all kinds of creepy comments under the posts, we were turned around. The caption on the post in question just said something like, 10 minutes into dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave Desert. The same distance you know where to look. We'd heard the first 2 nights. According to Charles, only he had been in contact with the account. And whoever was running it had given him some areas to check out. And that's all Charles needed from somewhere else. He was instantly obsessed with the idea. They were all coming so that Saturday, us. It was me, but it was Charles, that there were multiple and our other friend James. I had a Wrangler that was perfect for off-road desert driving. Started moving so we faster. By some miracle, we didn't have a specific address or anything. Just a general area, all of our stuff in drop somewhere in the middle I drove of the Mojave as fast as I could. The spot Charles had marked was way off in the desert. The road was really far from anything, and without any light, we turned off the main road almost half an hour earlier. Like every dip and the dirt path we were on barely looked like a road anymore. After what felt like forever, we drove around for what felt like forever. I didn't stop speeding. No structures. I saw other cars. No landmarks. Tiki was holding it together. Nothing. But I could tell she kept checking my phone, and even though I knew we didn't have service, consoling her. James was in the back, call the police to report everything that happened. He started telling Charles this whole thing was a waste of time, and that he had been scammed by some troll account. My girlfriend and I. Charles insisted that we keep looking in the middle of the desert. He's always been stubborn with navigation, for what I'm about to tell you, so I figured I'd indulge him a little while longer. I've always been eventually suspicious of my just as we were about to call it quits. Suspicious. James pointed out something off to the right, but I can't think of a better one. At first, it looked like just more rock and sand. And spent as we got closer, before moving to the States, this half-collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a slope. The rest is history. Part of the entrance looked like it had been caved in. Met my dad, but you could still see a dark hole behind the support beams. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely man-made, and definitely a mine shaft. Thinks that's by design. Charles didn't say anything at first. Talking about he just pulled out his phone and dismissed the offline questions about it. He downloaded when we still had changed the subject and dropped a pin on it. Growing up, then he turned to James and said, because she had some childhood trauma, to which James said he'd just gone disgust. But even I had to admit that it was kind of crazy. I mean, we'd been driving in circles out in the middle of nowhere. But as I grew older, somehow I started getting more curious. I parked a few yards from the entrance. My mom was just dodging those kinds of questions at family gatherings, and we all climbed out and here's what I do know. Charles had even brought masks for us to wear in northern Mexico. The three of us walked up to the mine. It looked even sketchier up close. Being a border Charles picked up a rock and tossed it in. The closest I've ever gotten to knowing anything about her parents. A few seconds later, as a joke that she told a few times when I was younger. Then nothing. She would laugh really at her dad's side of the family. Charles looked back at us and said if we tripped on the way down, crooks. We were probably dead. But she was never able to tell. We started the descent. I never read into the shaft was in a straight drop. It slopped down at a steep angle. But as I grew older, but not enough that we had to climb wondering whether there was more truth to that. The ground was loose and uneven, and there were old wooden beams lining parts of the wall. And she never spoke about her mother. They seemed pretty sturdy. The only other piece of information I have is quieter. I'm not going to write it out. It was really eerie down there, so I'm just going to call him. Couldn't even see any light coming through one night from the entrance when I was around 10 or 11. Eventually, I woke up in the middle of what felt like the bottom to use the bathroom. The shaft leveled out as I was walking to a wider tunnel room. that branched off in a few directions. In a quiet voice. It looked exactly how you'd imagine. Spanish. Old support beams every few yards, multiple times. Rusted rails half buried in dirt. The way someone talking about someone dust on everything, as opposed to someone scraps of wood and metal scattered around. All the lights in parts of old carts, so I couldn't actually see her. It smelled kind of stale in there, even though I knew it was just Mom. My young self was still. I didn't realize how much of a blessing the masks were until that point. The light switch on. We picked a tunnel. She didn't scream just started or even react to the light. None of us really said much, anticipating that I'd be there. Looking for anything specific. Instead, just exploring. She immediately hung up the phone. There honestly wasn't much cool stuff I had never seen from her. The place looked like it had been mostly cleaned out of anything worth taking. And I did. But then we heard something. That's basically all I know about somewhere further down the tunnel. A joke? It sounded like something Dad's very vague occupation. At first, I thought I imagined it. But I looked over to tell you how Charles a year ago to date. And James motioned for us to turn off our flashlights, so we did. Lived there my whole life. We just stood there in total darkness. I was a year removed from graduating college. The sound came again through the desert. It was a sort of scraping sound, one of my old like metal friends, or maybe even wood. It was a really long drive. On talking, it was hard to tell with the echo, and I was tired. It seemed like whatever it was getting closer. I'm not a podcast guy. We stood there in the dark for maybe 30 seconds. My contacts, maybe a full minute. Calling up, it was hard to tell. And whatever girls, the scraping sound kept coming, slowly getting louder. I decided to call my mom. It didn't sound too close to us. Really into soccer, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Upcoming Champions League. Then James accidentally flicked his flashlight on, and then off again. She's got some serious knowledge on the sport. The scraping stopped, and everything went silent. Out of nowhere, I saw there was this loud metallic clang from somewhere deep in the tunnel. It didn't like whatever was being dragged had just been dropped. So I wasn't sure. And right after that came the most awful demonic scream might need help I'd ever heard. So I slowed down. It barely sounded human. My mom turned still on the phone, not even caring about how loud we were being. I've never run faster in my entire life, wondering if it would be a good idea. I could hear footsteps coming from somewhere behind me. I could do anything, and I thought I was going to have a panic attack from the two cars. I was in the back, trying to keep up, and then I tripped on something and realized there was one of my shoes came off, approaching mine, and I struggled to stay upright. I was unarmed. I didn't have time to go back for it, my only choice, so I just kept going, trying to ignore the pain in my foot on my door. Up ahead, motioning for me to Charles and James had already reached the incline further back, and were climbing. I practically threw myself out of my car. When I tell you climbing those stairs half barefoot was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced. I'm not exaggerating. The man barked a few commands in Spanish. I picked up a new splinter every few seconds. I consider my inability for the adrenaline coursing through my veins failures in life. I don't think I would have been able to make it out of there. By the time I finally made it out into the open air, at least communicate with my assailants. I needed James and Charles to damn near carry me over to the car. What they wanted me to do. I couldn't drive like that. So James jumped in the driver's seat. Keys. I barely got the door closed before he threw it in gear and floored it. And it looked like I was going to be followed up the shaft in the barren desert with no viable sticking around to find out. One of the men got into my truck in silence, and that's all the way to the nearest hospital. I realized I thought the pain was going to make me pass out. And since my truck ended up having to get a tetanus shot, still on the line. And even after all my wounds were clean, my driver's side all the splinters were removed. As the man reached his finger toward the screen for days, as if to hang up. A few days later, once I could walk without limping to his mind, James told us he dropped his wallet somewhere near the shaft, probably when he was helping me get to the car. He hadn't said anything at the time, but now he figured it was worth going back, just to the entrance. They were having a full conversation back inside. So the three of us drove back out there, windows and doors using the pin that Charles had saved, speaking Spanish. Obviously, James' wallet was nowhere in sight. I'm 90% sure we did find Sar's name a few times. It was sitting a few feet from the mine's entrance, and he was making sure he cautiously walked over to it and picked it up. The other guys must have realized what was going on, or dare I say something, because they stopped at guarding to it and approached the car. There were literally teeth marks in my shoe, inside rolled and entire chunks of it were missing. Stared at me as he spoke to the other two men. We didn't stick around much longer after that. After he finished talking, none of us can come up with any rational explanation. Stared at me. You might be quick to just say it was some homeless person living down there. Long after but if that were the case, hung up the phone. How the hell had they managed to stay alive for so long? They handed me all my stuff. There was no food down there, including my car keys. Would they eat? The only thing they Charles said the Instagram account never responded to. One of the men looked at me. He DM'd him about what happened. In a thick accent said, "It's going to be a long time before I do any urban exploring in the desert to lose all my cash. I've always been a rugged kind of guy. As I drove away, I've always loved the outdoors, and a vacation to me is a camp behind me or fishing trip, speeding off not some extravagant excursion away to some resort or something. My plan was to try girlfriend of 6 months shares my love of nature. None of the cars That's probably one of the main reasons we started dating. If I had to be honest, of driving, a couple weeks back, my mother back, Tiki and I decided to do something a little different. She told me that she had to the desert to camp for a few days. The police on them. We'd both done forests, tracking my location, lakes, and knew exactly where I was. But neither of us had really experienced that was obviously BS. And insisted she tell me what isolation really talking about. The desert offered. She was adamant about her story. It just felt like something we had to try. Most of the Spanish was just her. One of the main reasons we landed on the desert too, believe was the stargazing. There was nothing. That's something we both love. Probably more than anything else. Police for me. Even back when we first started dating, eventually we'd take drives out past town, and I drove the rest of the way of the truck in complete silence and watch the stars. In all honesty, so when we read that this spot was far from any towns or light pollution, but over it was basically a done deal. I couldn't anymore. I found a place online that was supposedly remote, my mom had legal kind of tied to a Mexican gang or cartel growing up in land, and even fire rings and stars. Maybe the tie didn't end when she left Mexico. We packed up the truck with our gear and made the 3-hour drive early that Friday morning. Keep the charade up. The last hour or so, I should just straight up ask her, felt like it went on really forever. Worried about what kind there wasn't a house or sign of human life in sight. Honestly, what kind of half the appeal I might be getting myself into. By the time we found the campsite, the truth, it was already late afternoon. The place was completely void of people, just as I had hoped. The first couple nights were exactly what we wanted. Warm days, cool nights, clear skies. We'd sit out by the fire with a couple drinks, pass a little joint back and forth, and just talk about dumb stuff or lie back and stare at the sky. Not having a schedule or any distractions was really, really refreshing. And, yeah, we'd fool around a bit in the tent. That was all part of the fun, too. It felt good to be disconnected. Both nights, though, we heard something strange, not close, just somewhere way out in the distance. It was this low, drawn-out sound, like a howl or a moan. It didn't really sound like a person, more like an animal. The first night, we both sort of paused when we heard it. Tiki looked at me like, "Did you hear that too?" And I nodded, but we ended up laughing it off. I said it was probably a coyote or a mountain lion or something, and she agreed. Same thing the second night, right around the same time too. We chalked it up to being desert wildlife. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out here that we're not used to hearing. It was unsettling, sure, but we weren't going to let it ruin the trip. The third night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. It was soft at first, just a couple faint crunches, like someone walking slowly over dry dirt. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't an animal. It was too steady and slow. I didn't move. I wanted to grab the flashlight, wake Tiki up, and say something, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my heart was pounding, and every muscle in my body felt locked up. The steps didn't go around the tent, they just stopped a few feet away, and for a long time, there was nothing but silence. I stared at the ceiling of the tent, barely blinking, waiting to hear something else, but whoever or whatever it was didn't make another sound. I waited there for God knows how long, praying they'd walk away, but then, out of nowhere, I heard a flick, that sharp, unmistakable sound of a lighter. A small orange glow appeared through the fabric of the tent, maybe waist height, a few feet off to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady for a few seconds, then started waving it around slowly. I didn't move. I just stared at it, trying not to make a sound. And then the flame got bigger, way bigger. It went from a flicker to a glow, like they'd lit something, a torch maybe. Then, without warning, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the dirt with a dull thump, and a second later, the side of the tent lit up. The heat came fast, way faster than I expected, and within seconds, the fire started spreading. That's what finally snapped me out of my haze. I woke Tiki up, and she immediately realized what was happening. We scrambled, no time to think. We started tossing our stuff out of the tent and onto the dirt. I'm not even sure we got everything. We sprinted out of the tent while the fire spread. Tiki grabbed one of our water jugs and dumped it on the fire while I tried stomping out anything that had caught on fire. Eventually, we got it under control. Half the tent was completely ruined. I grabbed the flashlight and started scanning the area around the tent, looking for the person who had just tried to kill us, but there was no one, at least no one I could see. Tiki started packing up our stuff, and I quickly followed suit. We started speed walking what we thought was the direction of the truck. There weren't any landmarks, and it was dark, so we were practically guessing. After a few minutes, it became clear we were turned around. At some point, maybe 10 minutes into walking, I heard it again. That same distant scream we'd heard the first 2 nights. Only this time, it didn't stop. It kept going, like an animal was in constant pain, and then another scream started from somewhere else, and then another one. They were all coming from behind us, but it was clear that there were multiple things out there. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed Tiki's arm and started moving faster. By some miracle, we actually found the truck. We practically threw all of our stuff into it, and I drove off as fast as I could. I couldn't go too fast, though. The road was rough. And without any light besides my high beams, it felt like every dip and bend could flip us. After what felt like forever, we finally hit a main road. I didn't stop speeding until I saw other cars again. Tiki was holding it together, but I could tell she wanted to cry, and I was doing a really bad job of consoling her. We did call the police to report everything that happened. All I can think about all this is how, if I weren't such a light sleeper, my girlfriend and I could have been murdered that night in the middle of the desert. This is important context for what I'm about to tell you, so I'm going to start here. I've always been a little suspicious of my mom's past. Suspicious isn't exactly the right word, but I can't think of a better one. She was born in Mexico and spent her childhood there before moving to the States alone to pursue an undergrad degree. The rest is history. She found work, met my dad, and has lived in America ever since. I don't really know a lot about her life before America, and there's a part of me that thinks that's by design. She avoids talking about her past entirely and dismisses any questions about it with a joke or by changing the subject. Growing up, my dad always told me that it was because she had some childhood trauma that was better left undiscussed. And I believed that for the longest time. I mean, why wouldn't I? But as I grew older, I started getting more and more curious and would often marvel at how skilled my mom was at dodging those kinds of questions at family gatherings and whatnot. Here's what I do know. She lived in a border town somewhere in northern Mexico along the Texas border. It doesn't have the best reputation, being a border town and all. The closest I've ever gotten to knowing anything about her parents is a joke that she told a few times when I was younger. She would laugh that her dad's side of the family were the politicians and her mom's side were the crooks. But she was never able to tell which was which. I never read into it as anything beyond a cynical political joke, but as I grew older, I started wondering whether there was more truth to that statement than I had originally thought. Her dad worked for the government in some capacity, and she never spoke about her mother, not once. The only other piece of information I have is a name. I'm not going to write it out, so I'm just going to call him R. One night, when I was around 10 or 11, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I was walking past our living room, I heard my mom speaking in a quiet voice. I didn't understand Spanish, but she repeated R's name multiple times. The way someone talking about someone would, as opposed to someone speaking directly to someone. All the lights in there were off, so I couldn't actually see her, but I could hear her. Even though I knew it was just Mom, my young self was still a little scared of the dark, so I instinctively flipped the light switch on. She didn't scream or even react to the light. It was like she was anticipating that I'd be there. Instead, she immediately hung up the phone and glared at me with a look I had never seen from her. She told me to go back to bed, and I did, and that's it. That's basically all I know about my mother's past. A joke, her dad's very vague occupation, and the name R. What I'm about to tell you happened almost a year ago to date, and it's been on my mind a lot recently. I'm from Arizona, lived there my whole life. I was a year removed from graduating college, and I was driving through the desert on my way to meet up with one of my old college friends. It was a really long drive, on talking road trip hours, and I was tired of listening to music. I'm not a podcast guy, so I was low-key cycling through my contacts, calling up all my friends and whatever girls I happened to be talking to. Eventually, I decided to call my mom. We're both really into soccer, so we were talking about the upcoming Champions League fixtures and how exciting the matchups were. She's got some serious knowledge on the sport, so the two of us can talk soccer forever. Out of nowhere, I saw two pickup trucks blocking the road up ahead. It didn't look like a car accident, so I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I was worried that someone might need help or something, so I slowed down as I approached. My mom was still on the phone, but I hadn't let her know what was happening. I stopped my car and sat there, wondering if it would be a good idea to get out. Before I could do anything, 3 men sprang out from the 2 cars, all holding guns. I froze up and realized there was another car quickly approaching mine from behind. I was unarmed, so compliance was really my only choice at that point. One of the men tapped his gun on my door, motioning for me to get out. The other 2 stood a little further back. I put my hands up and slowly got out of my car. By that point, the car behind me had fully caught up and was parked a little ways away. The man barked a few commands in Spanish, but I didn't understand what they were saying. I consider my inability to speak Spanish one of my biggest failures in life, especially as a Mexican American. And in that moment, not being able to at least communicate with my assailants, I wanted to die. It didn't take a translator to know what they wanted me to do, though. Before I knew it, my phone, keys, wallet, and other personal belongings were in their possession. And it looked like I was going to be stranded in a barren desert with no viable escape. One of the men got into my truck, and that's when things took a turn. I realized I hadn't hung up the phone with my mom, and since my truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through my driver's side window as the man reached his finger toward the screen as if to hang up, only to pull it back like he had changed his mind. I kept watching, and it seemed like he was listening. I instantly connected the dots. My mom must have been speaking to him. Eventually, I saw his lips start moving and realized they were having a full-on conversation in there. I obviously couldn't hear anything because the windows and doors were closed, but I knew they were speaking Spanish. I swear in my life, I'm 90% sure he repeated R's name a few times. Like my mom had said it, and he was making sure he heard it correctly. At some point, The other guys must have realized what was going on, because they stopped guarding me and approached the car. The guy inside rolled the window down and stared at me as he spoke to the other two men. After he finished talking, all three of them turned and stared at me, as if sizing me up. The conversation didn't last long after that. They hung up the phone and walked back over to me. They handed me all my stuff back, including my car keys. The only thing they took was the cash in my wallet. One of the men looked at me, smiled, and in a thick accent said, "Tax," as he did it. I had never been more happy to lose all my cash in my life. As I drove away, all three cars, including the one that had been behind me, started speeding off into the desert, away from the road. My plan was to try memorizing their license plates, but none of the cars had any. I was still in shock. After a few minutes of driving, I called my mother back and demanded an explanation. She told me that she had simply threatened to call the police on them, as she was tracking my location and knew exactly where I was. I told her that was obviously BS and insisted she tell me what they had really been talking about. She was adamant about her story, though, and told me most of the Spanish was just her pleading her case. Even though I didn't believe her story, there was nothing I could do but accept it. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. Eventually, we ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in complete silence. In all honesty, I blocked that experience out of my mind for as long as I could, but over time, I just couldn't anymore. I'm becoming more and more sure that my mom had some kind of tie to a Mexican gang or cartel growing up. And even scarier, maybe the tie didn't end when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not stupid, so I don't know how much longer she expects to keep the charade up. I feel like I should just straight up ask her, but I'm really worried about what kind of tension that might create, or, worse, what kind of world I might be getting myself into, should she tell me the truth.